Number 5. Bigfoot Go Wow. Our first sighting was made by a resident living just west of Pigeon Lake, who was fortunate enough to witness a pair of strange creatures near their home that were unlike anything they had ever seen or heard before. As they themselves put it, I was on an acreage and looked to the west near a tree line and a fence line about 75 yards from me. At first, I thought it was a man coming out of the trees. Then, I looked again, and this huge beast was turning around. I saw the side profile, then I saw his back as he swiftly went back into the trees. I would estimate 8 to 9 feet tall and several hundred pounds. It was cinnamon in color, and I noticed the muscles rippling on its shoulders. It was cinnamon in color, and I noticed the muscles rippling on his shoulders and back as it went back into the woods. It looked like it did not have a neck. I also thought I had noticed another one crouched down not far from the big one. About 15 minutes earlier to this, I was in another part of the yard and had heard a wah, wah, then a tree knock, but really didn't attribute these sounds to anything until I saw the Bigfoot 15 minutes later. Were these creatures members of the infamous Bigfoot family? And were the strange noises the witness heard earlier made by the creature? We may never know for sure. Number 4. A family sighting. Our next sighting comes from a man who was playing with his siblings when he was a child and saw the creature making its way through the woods. Considering what he saw, he relates a pretty chill story. As he put it, in 1980, our family lived in Morley, Alberta, close to the bridge and the school. We played all throughout that area on motorbikes, making forts in the woods and exploring near the banks of the Elbow River. My older brother was 14 years old, and my sister was about 18 years old. I was only 10 years old. I remember watching a tall, big figure traverse the foothill behind what is now the community school. What struck me at first was it was very large and moved very fast, though it was not running. The figure was dark against the pale straw-colored hill. I knew immediately that it was not human. It was upright and moved on 2 feet. I also remember it had a funny shaped head. In my 10-year-old mind, it was as if he had balanced a cap on the crown of his head instead of pulling it onto his head. It was moving away from us. My sister relates that he was grayish, had hair all over its body, had an oblong head, had no clothes on, and was bipedal and moving quickly. My brother remembers that it was very large, estimating over 8 feet, and again, the oblong head. I don't remember what day it was, or when it happened. It must have been either just approaching winter or coming into spring. The trees were bare. The bush on the hill he was moving on was scarce. We saw him clearly in the daylight. He was not trying to conceal himself in the trees that ran along the river. He did not stop. None of us remember feeling afraid, and all of us knew what it was. We didn't ever talk about it, but not because we were ashamed or scared. It was as if we had simply seen a moose or something. If you saw Bigfoot with your own 2 eyes, do you think you would manage to keep as calm as these kids did? I think it would depend on how close the creature was, and whether or not it looked hungry. Number 3. Off-roading in the company truck. Our next story features a group of blue-collar Berta boys who were driving one night and saw a Sasquatch and chose to respond in the most Burton way possible. I must warn you, this story is extremely Canadian. It was the winter of 1992. I was 19 at the time and had been working the last year and a half doing seismic work all through Alberta, British Columbia, and southern Saskatchewan. We just got back to work from Christmas holidays, and we're not working between Valley View and Fox Creek. We were just driving into the staging area one morning. It was snowing like crazy, snowflakes the size of loonies. By the way, for our American audience who are unsure, a loony is this big. Anyways, I was driving the truck at the end of the caravan. It had been snowing so hard all night, and the snow had piled up on the spruce trees, looking like walls along the tree lines. So, we were driving down a cut line to the staging area, and I had come out of the bush into a clearing. From the corner of my right eye, I seen a huge black object about 600 yards, moving on the edge of the tree line, and then drop out of sight. I instantly pushed my clutch, and pointing to the trees, I tell the other 3 guys in my truck, watch! About 15 seconds later, a huge black Sasquatch stood up from below the snow line and walks 5 to 6 steps and drops down again. The 3 guys with me suddenly all yell out, "What the f?" And I throw my shift to first gear, cranking the wheels to the right, and hammered it. I was plodding through the deep snow and got about halfway when it stands up quickly, looking right at us, and launches itself into the thick spruce trees. You could clearly see its silhouette left behind as it knocked the snow from the trees. Just then, my radio goes off, and it's my operator flipping out, asking me what the hell I was doing out there with a new company truck. When we got back to him, he asked me again, so I told him what I had seen. He asked the 3 other guys, and they all said he seen something huge and black and drove over it. We're not sure what it it was. Looked like a huge moose. That night in the hotel, the three of them come to my room and wanted to talk about it, and I told them to go away because the time to talk about it had passed and they almost got me fired for chasing a moose. They all got super apologetic and said to me, "You grow up your whole life thinking it's a story and a myth, and it's right there in front of you. Nobody's going to believe you." I replied that people would believe it a lot more if 4 guys say this is what we seen, not 1 saying this is what we seen and 3 others lying to themselves. An interesting story to be sure, and frankly, a typically Albertan response to seeing a mythical creature. Number 2, a hunter's encounter. Our next story is the first one where the subjects seem in any danger from the creature, so I imagine it was quite a terrifying experience. As the encounter was reported on albertasasquatch.com, witness was driving down a logging road, bear hunting with his wife and children at approximately 9:30 p.m. when they spotted what appeared to be the rear end of a bear entering the left-hand side of a cut line for a power line they were driving by. The witness exited the vehicle and walked down the cut line approximately 50 yards to where the animal had entered the bush line. When he arrived on the right-hand side of the cut line, poplar trees of 6 to 8 inch diameter began to shake violently. The witness described it as an explosion of movement in the bush next to him. Immediately, he saw 2 very large hands start to part the trees and bushes with fingers approximately just smaller than a Red Bull can in diameter and approximately the length of his entire hand. The witness was face to face with an animal they can only describe as a Sasquatch. Despite being uphill from where it was standing, the witness could see the forehead and nose well, however the mouth was obscured by bush. The witness described the head to be the width of a basketball, with golf ball size eyes, a large pronounced brow ridge, a large forehead with little hair, a flattened nose with nostrils the size of 2 thumbs side by side, and matted hair. The witness describes the eyes as having been dark brown in color with no whites. However, the area where the whites of the eyes would be had a purplish tinge of color. The witness also mentioned seeing eyelashes on the eyelids of the creature. The witness raised his rifle to the creature and it immediately retreated into the forest 20 to 40 yards away from the witness. The witness's wife was flashing the lights of the truck, having seen the creature, although not well, from the side view where the truck was parked, signaling the witness to come back. The wife described the animal to be hunched over significantly, approximately an estimated 3 feet from its true height. Although she could not see it in detail, she said she could see its shape in the bush and could see it moving throughout the encounter. He began to make his way back. However, every second step he took, trees would shake just 15 yards into the line. The tree shaking followed him all the way back to the truck where he got in. They immediately heard a deep woo sound several times. They heard a bang on the truck roof and sped a short distance away, where they pulled over to see what had hit the truck. They found a large dinner plate-sized clump of mud with grass in it, as if it had been torn from the ground that had been lobbed at the truck and landed on the roof. They left the area for the night. The witness returned to the site of the encounter and found what he described to be a possible handprint in the mud on the cut line and some suspicious impressions. Although they did not show any distinct detail, only a large elongated but wide set of impressions. He also found trees which had been stripped of branches to about 7 feet high, and the bark was peeled down towards the ground. The sap was described as fresh, coming from the damaged area. The area was generally disturbed with broken branches and some upturned ground. The witness is an experienced hunter and outdoorsman and said he had never believed in Sasquatch until this encounter. He hopes to see another Sasquatch in more detail in the future. If this hunter does eventually come face to face with another Sasquatch, I hope he will refrain from shooting it, as he is a rare species and therefore not covered by his hunting license. Number 1. My ski buddy Bigfoot. Our final tale involves a man engaging in winter sports and coming across another man out in nature who he greeted in typically polite Canadian fashion. As he related the encounter, was cross-country skiing and was trudging back to the parking lot at Ribbon Creek going south. I stopped in a clearing to rest a bit and check out the river, looking west. From the third tree up the hill on the other side of the clearing, I saw a big guy in a dark parka who must have been snowshoeing step out from behind the tree. I watched as he came down around the trees to the first row of trees beside the clearing. I watched as he crouched, reached out, and shook the first tree. Spruce tree, about 30 or so feet tall. After he shook the tree, he stepped back as the snow fell off of it. I was thinking, God, he's got big arms, must be a lineman. After the snow had fallen, he walked around the tree and into the clearing. I waved. He was about 85 to 90 yards away and started walking towards me. As he walked towards me, I began to realize that it isn't a big guy in a dark parka snowshoeing, and I think I went into shock. He walked up to about 18 to 20 yards away and stopped. We just stood there, looking at each other for about 5 minutes, when the shock shock wore off, at that point I was thinking, he's really big, and if he wants to get me, he can. So I waved and started south back towards Ribbon Creek. I went a little ways and turned back, and he was gone. I think he was just curious, not threatening at all. Just came out to have a look at me, I guess. Never did tell anyone, just thought you could add me to the list of, oh, I know they're out there. There's something comforting that a man could get so close to Bigfoot and have such a relatively calm and pleasant encounter with the creature. The only thing that would have made that story better would be if Bigfoot had waved back.
Starting off this countdown, we have Michael Green. Michael Green is a former US Army tank commander and fraud investigator who ended up encountering the Bigfoot. So back in the mid-2000s, Green decided to camp out by himself one night in a forest in North Carolina. Like I said, this dude worked for the Army, so it would take an awful lot to scare him. But that night, he was thoroughly spooked. So he woke up to the sound of something approaching his tent. He then said, and I quote, 2 seconds later, it was right over my tent. He then said it let out a deafening roar that, and I quote, scared the devil out of me, as you can imagine. 2 nights later, he was camping in the same forest, but this time with some friends. That night, they actually saw the creature that scared Green previously. Green described it as a lumbering bipedal ape-like beast. He said, and I quote, it was about 7.5 or 8 feet tall and striding with that ponderous arm swing. He went on to say that the biggest mistake of his life was not recording the beast. From there, he set out on a mission to capture this beast on film. He returned to the same area week after week with cameras and night vision equipment and would just wait for it. In 2009, his patience finally paid off, and he captured this creature on his night vision camera. Coming in at number 4, we have the cabin on the lake. This story was shared by a Reddit user on a post talking about real-life encounters with cryptids. According to him, his story takes place a couple of years ago when he was visiting his family's cabin. At this time, the cabin was in a pretty remote area. It wasn't until later on when it started to become more heavily developed. Anyways, one day they decided to go for a picnic in their usual spot. Their picnic spot was at the edge of a very steep hill. At the bottom of the hill was a field that would eventually merge with a large forest. So they were all sitting around and eating their food when they heard a really loud banging coming from the bottom of the hill. So his dad got up and went to investigate. When he did, he saw a massive creature standing on 2 feet, taking large logs and throwing them over his head. The logs were then hitting the tree trunks, which is what was making that loud noise. His mom went over to see, and she witnessed this creature as well. So they all packed up and got out there as fast as possible. That's not all though. About 4 years ago, they were having Christmas with his aunt, who would also stay at a cabin in the same area. They were all sharing memories from up there, and that's when his aunt was all like, yo, I have the wildest story. She talked about the time she was picking berries to make jam. That's when she saw this weird creature in the distance. She thought it was a bear until it stood up on 2 legs and started walking into the woods. Not only that, but after hearing his aunt's story, he decided to do some research and found that there were tons of similar sightings in that area. So could it be that the Bigfoot lives by this dude's cottage? In our 3rd spot today, we have the 911 call. Back in 1996, in Kitsap Peninsula in Washington State, the police received a very eerie call for help in the middle of the night. The call was made from a man who claims a strange tall beast was in his yard. The man starts off pretty calm on the phone, but when he realizes that what he is seeing might just be the Bigfoot, he becomes increasingly panicked. In fact, the call was saved and posted online, so I'll share some segments of it. So according to the man, he was alerted when the sensor light in his backyard came on and he could see what looked like a creature or a man. He couldn't tell. The man then goes on to explain that his dog was recently killed, which is why he's more on edge, because this creature could be the beast that killed his dog. Then the man starts to panic. He realizes just how big this thing is. When the police arrived, the beast had already left. So unfortunately, they didn't get to witness it themselves. But a week later, his neighbor also had a similar encounter. They described a big, tall man in all black or covered in black fur lurking in their backyard. Fortunately, this time the police managed to capture a photo of it, but they never released it to the public to see. Moving on to number 2 today, we have the Midnight Bigfoot Man. On April 24th, 2018, a 24-year-old woman who wanted her identity kept a secret had just left a 24-hour gym around midnight. She was headed to her car in the vacant parking lot when she heard a twig snap. She turned around and saw an 8-foot-tall creature covered in gray fur. When she looked at the beast, it turned around and ran right back into the woods. Now, she described this thing as being massive. Not only was it super tall, but she claims it was several hundreds of pounds. But despite its size, it moved very quickly. Shook, she immediately called her parents and they came to get her. Not long after, nationally acclaimed Bigfoot investigator Matthew Moneymaker got wind of her story. He interviewed the woman and then decided to investigate the area himself. From his investigation, he found a number of deer tracks in the area. So he believed that the Bigfoot was following a deer up the path, and when he saw the woman, he got scared and fled. He continued on saying, and I quote, "In Ashland, there are only 3 possibilities. Either the witness is lying, which I am sure she is not, or she saw someone in a Bigfoot costume, which makes no sense. Ordinarily, in a hoax, the person reporting the sighting or taking the photos is in on the scam. Or she saw a real Bigfoot, which I believe is the case here." After a while of doing these kinds of investigations, you get pretty good at knowing when someone is telling the truth. And he believes that this woman was genuinely telling the truth. He could see how shaken up she was, and she didn't want her name attached to the story, so it's not like she was seeking fame. So what did she have to gain here? Based on these facts and others, he believes that this woman is telling the truth and did encounter a real Bigfoot. And in our number 1 spot today, we have the Russian Bigfoot. So the Bigfoot is said to mainly live in the wooded and remote areas in Canada and in some areas in the US. But this next encounter is in Russia. So this might just prove that there are Bigfoots living all over the world. And someone let me know, what's the plural of Bigfoot? Is it big feet? Is it Bigfoots? Let me know in the comments below. So back in 2016, a family was driving down a rural road when they caught sight of this weird black creature in the distance. The son in the backseat started recording it, and I guess Bigfoot didn't like that because it began to chase the car. Unfortunately, I don't speak Russian, but someone did translate the video, and in that section we just saw, the mom is making sure that her son is recording. They believe that they finally lost the Bigfoot, so they slow down, only for it to emerge in the distance again. They drive off again and stop again further down the road to film the beast once more. That damn thing is running through the fields pretty fast. A couple seconds later, the son decides to roll down his window to get a better shot of it. And that made the Bigfoot even more angry. Camera cuts off with the Bigfoot running directly towards them. According to the couple who made a report after this incident, the creature actually jumped onto their car and broke the glass. But obviously, they weren't recording when that happened. So, what did we learn from this? Number 1, don't mess with the Bigfoot. Number 2, the Bigfoot in Russia are super aggressive. And 3, always keep the camera rolling. Come on, guys.
Number 5 on this list is that Bigfoot was a government experiment. The legend of Bigfoot has been circulating around the globe for quite some time now. Some of the earliest records of the creature are from the late 1800s when a British Columbian newspaper wrote about a gorilla type of creature that was wandering around the woods in the area. Since then, the rumors and the lore have exploded and reached an all-time high in the 70s. This was also around the time that the FBI got involved. The American government actually got involved with the investigations that were happening with Bigfoot in the 1970s. Peter Byron, who's a leading expert on Bigfoot, sent some unidentified hair to the FBI and told them that his group needed the government's help. They'd found the hairs and weren't sure what kind of animal it belonged to. They thought that this hair may be some of the first legitimate proof of a new species or potentially even Bigfoot. The crazy thing was that the FBI they took it seriously. They snatched up the hairs and ran some tests on them, eventually concluding that they were actually the hairs of a deer. But the fact that the FBI, a super high-ranking government agency, took actual time and money to investigate these claims, well, it got people speculating that the government maybe had something to do with Bigfoot in the first place. The possibility of a government experiment that resulted in the creation of Bigfoot is a growing theory in the community. The government may have been performing some tests on animals, created Bigfoot, and then through some accident, Bigfoot got loose. I imagine that the government wouldn't want to own up to something like this because not only would it make them look highly inept to let a massive animal like this out on the loose, but there would also be a lot of moral questions being thrown at them from the public about genetic mutation like that. We've seen scientists in other countries before conduct genetic mutations like this, so it's not completely unrealistic to believe that this could have actually been the origin of Bigfoot. What makes this so scary though is that if this truly was the case, then what other creatures are the government engineering right now behind closed doors that we don't know about? Number 4 on this list is the Bigfoot species. What's scarier than just one Bigfoot? How about an entire colony of them? Bigfoot has often been depicted as a giant ape-like cryptid that stands anywhere from 6 to 15 feet tall. It stands on 2 legs, can emit a super high-pitched cry that can destroy someone's eardrums, and has a footstep that is roughly 24 inches in length. This massive size also contributes to the reports of its massive strength as well, with most people thinking that it's several times stronger than the strongest bear we have on the planet. All this being said, you certainly wouldn't want to run into this thing in the forest by yourself. The good news is that running into Bigfoot would be pretty hard to do because many people believe that there's only one Bigfoot. There are thousands of forests around the world, and the likelihood of running into the one singular Bigfoot, well, it's pretty slim. However, your odds increase dramatically if, well, there's actually a collection of these creatures. Assuming that Bigfoot wasn't a one-off government experiment, then it's pretty ridiculous for us to assume that there's only one of these creatures. Bigfoot would be a totally new species that we've never seen before, and to even get to this point of evolution, there would have needed to be more of them along the way. It should also be noted that there have been sightings of this beast in the forests of British Columbia and California, but then also a bunch of sightings in places like Maine and Ohio. Maine and Ohio are pretty far from British Columbia and California, and unless this singular Bigfoot is the most athletic creature on the planet, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense that it would regularly be running back and forth between these two places. What's far more likely is that there are several Bigfoot families in these regions. That potentially there's 1 or 2 families of the species in the west and a few in the east as well. That would still fit into the narrative of sightings being very rare, but would make a lot more sense than the singular Sasquatch. Geez, try saying that 5 times fast, guys. Singular Sasquatch, it's tough. If this is the case though, then it means that Bigfoot is probably slowly growing in number. Without any natural predators, one would think that as the years go by, more Sasquatches will continue to pop up, which in turn drastically increases the chance that we do have an encounter with this thing in the forest one day. Number 3 on this list is that Bigfoot is actually a demon. For years, Bigfoot has been talked about as being a creature, a massive mystical ape that may have evolved from gorillas at some point to become what it is now. But this also seems a tad bit far-fetched based on how little sightings there are of it. How is it possible that a creature that's so big hasn't ever been confirmed? The only explanation that I can think of is that Bigfoot's actually a demon. If Bigfoot is actually a mythical demon creature from hell, then it makes sense why we don't have regular sightings of it. It can go between hell and earth whenever it feels like, and potentially has the capability to turn invisible if it wants. If it was a demon, then it would remind me a lot of some of the ancient Greek demon creatures from mythology. Hades' 3-headed dog Cerberus comes to mind as a potential comparison. Now, if Bigfoot was actually a demonic creature from hell, then it begs the question, what is it doing here? Well, we may never know that. Sometimes devilish creatures just come to Earth for the sake of coming to Earth. For instance, there's an area called the Devil's Tramping Grounds in North Carolina where it's believed that the devil comes often and dances there. It's possible that Bigfoot does something similar in the forests of North America. It's also possible, however, that Bigfoot is up to some demonic mission. Potentially it's tasked with having individuals go missing in the forest and bringing them back to hell. Or maybe it's just the keeper of these woods and haunts them like a ghost would a house. Whatever the case is, I actually much prefer the idea that Bigfoot is just a big ape that has evolved. The second that we start throwing in the idea of a demon, he gets way more dangerous in my opinion. Number 2 on this list is the Bigfoot curse. We've talked already in this video about how Bigfoot could have been an experiment done by the government, or maybe just a product of evolution, but what if there's an actual curse that's going on here? Some of the First Nations who were around during the beginning of the Bigfoot legend believed that Bigfoot was actually a man that had been turned into this hunking hairy beast and had been given special powers and abilities. These powers and abilities though were at the cost of his human appearance, memories, and ability to communicate with our species in general. They worried that this curse could be passed on, and that if you didn't respect the forest, that this curse may find you next. This curse legend also sort of started the association with Bigfoot and environmental care. For a while there, Bigfoot was portrayed as an evil creature lurking around the woods, ready to pounce on unsuspecting victims. But in the 80s, the narrative changed a little bit. Bigfoot could potentially be the guardian of the forest and someone who's here to remind us that we need to protect our environment. This urban legend takes that a step further and says that this creature was actually once a person. Maybe this person who was cursed to be Bigfoot didn't care enough about our forests, and now they're cursed to forever be this giant beast and to live in the woods alone. This would be to show someone what it's like to have this forest be your home. I like the idea behind this curse. I think all of us should be a little bit more environmentally conscious. However, it's kind of scary to think that I could turn into Bigfoot and live alone, misunderstood in the woods for the rest of my life. Probably not the coolest existence, to be honest. Number 1 on this list is the Bigfoot Omen. Seeing Bigfoot is something that only a handful of people have ever done in their lives. This is why, to this day, its existence hasn't been able to be confirmed. As cool as it would be to see this creature and know for sure that the stories are accurate, some say that it might be the worst omen of your life. Is it possible that all of the limited sightings of Bigfoot through the years haven't just been a coincidence, but they've actually been on purpose? What if Bigfoot chooses who it shows itself to? What if these encounters aren't just by chance, but it's actually an omen? This is what a lot of people believe in regards to this creature. The Ojibwe of the Northern Plains believed that seeing this beast was an omen of bad luck or a warning of incoming misfortune. This is especially scary for all those Bigfoot enthusiasts out there trying to find Bigfoot, because if you ever actually do see the beast, then it might be the last thing you ever do. Personally, I find this urban legend to be a tad bit hard to believe. Bigfoot is a legendary creature that's said to be magnificent and majestic. Seeing this thing out in the wild, assuming it doesn't attack you, would honestly be a life-changing event. I would have hoped that seeing it would have even brought you good luck. Fingers crossed that my version of events is the right one, and seeing this creature isn't an indicator of an unavoidable morbid future.
Coming in at 5, the Jersey Devil. In southern New Jersey, the Jersey Devil is a legendary creature that is said to inhabit the Pine Barrens of South Jersey. The creature is described as a flying biped with hooves, however there are many variations. The most common description is that of a kangaroo-like or wyvern-like creature with a goat or horse-like head. Leathery bat-like wings, horns, small arms with clawed hands, legs with cloven hooves, and a forked tail. It is often reported as moving quickly and emitting a high-pitched blood-curdling scream. Now, the legend originated with a Pine Barrens resident named Jane Leeds, known as Mother Leeds. The legend goes that Mother Leeds had 12 children, and after finding out she was pregnant for the 13th time, cursed the child in frustration, crying that the child would be the devil. During 1735, Mother Leeds was in labour on a stormy night while her friends gathered around her. Born as a normal child, the 13th child changed to a creature with hooves, a goat's head, bat wings, and a forked tail. The child then supposedly began flying around, wreaking havoc. Now, the legend certainly has some staying power, considering that nearly 200 years later, the devil became a big deal once again, this time in 1909. That January, reports of odd footprints being found in the snow on the roofs of houses caused such a panic that the devil was up to no good that mills and schools closed, and some people were too scared to leave their homes. Since then, the Jersey Devil has been to blame for most strange happenings around New Jersey, and in 1960, Camden's merchants even offered a $10,000 bounty to anyone who would capture the mischievous devil, but of course they never received any takers. It's also mischievous. We Brits know what's right. Coming in at 4, Bunnyman. The Bunnyman is an urban legend that originated after 2 incidents in Fairfax County, Virginia, back in 1970. The legend, like many others, has multiple variations, most involving a man wearing a rabbit costume who attacks people with an axe or hatchet. Now, most of the stories hail from a southern railway overpass spanning Colchester Road near Clifton, Virginia, often referred to as Bunnyman Bridge. The legend surfaced after Fairfax County Public Library historian and archivist Brian A. Conley extensively extensively researched the Bunnyman legend. He located 2 incidents of a man in a rabbit costume threatening people with an axe, with the reports occurring 10 days apart in 1970. Now, the second reported sighting occurred on the evening of October 29, 1970, when construction worker Paul Phillips approached a man standing on the porch of an unfinished home in Kings Park West. According to Phillips, the man was wearing a grey, black and white bunny costume and was about 20 years old. He began chopping at a porch post with a long-handled axe, saying, "You are trespassing. If you come any closer, I'll chop off your head." Spooky. Rumors spread like wildfire, with the Washington Post even reporting on the legend, mentioning the multiple incidents including man in bunny costume sought in Fairfax October 22, 1970. The rabbit reappears October 31st, 1970. Bunnyman seen November 4th, 1970. Bunnyman reports are multiplying November 6, 1970. Not just that, but in 1973 a student at the University of Maryland College Park submitted a research paper that chronicled precisely 54 variations on the 2 incidents. Coming in at 3, Goatman, also known as the Pope Licker. This is a legendary part man, part goat and part sheep creature, reported to live beneath a railroad trestle bridge over Pope Lick Creek in the Fisherville area of Louisville, Kentucky. Now, numerous legends exist about the creature's origins and the methods it employs to claim its victims. According to some reports, the creature uses either hypnosis or voice mimicry to lure passers-by onto the trestle to meet their death before an oncoming train. Other stories, however, claim the monster jumps down from the trestle onto the roofs of cars passing beneath it. Other legends state it attacks its victims with blood-stained axe, and that the very sight of the creature is enough to drive people to leap off the high trestle themselves. The monster was the subject of a 1988 film by director Ron Schlichtner called The Legend of the Pope Lick Monster, with the majority of the movie being shot at the Pope Lick Trestle. Now, it has been confirmed that several people have died on or near the train trestle at Pope Creek in pursuit of the monster, and on April 23, 2016, a 26-year-old tourist from Ohio died after being hit by a train while searching for the creature. Coming in at number 2, Mothman. Hailing from West Virginia folklore, the Mothman is a creature reportedly seen in the Point Pleasant area from November 12, 1966 to December 15, 1967. On November 12th, 5 men who were digging a grave at a cemetery near Clendenin, West Virginia, claimed to have seen a man-like figure fly low from the trees over their heads. This is confirmed to be the first known sighting of what became known as the Mothman. Not long after, on November 15, 1966, 2 young couples from Point Pleasant told the police they saw a large grey creature whose eyes glowed red when their car headlights picked it up. They would go on to describe it as a large flying man with 10-foot wings, following their car while they were driving in an area outside of town known as TNT area, the site of a former World War II munitions plant. Following these sightings, more quickly began to occur, one that took place at the Silver Bridge, which would later go on to collapse, resulting in the death of 46 people, with the incident giving rise to the legend of the Mothman. Now, the Mothman was eventually introduced to a larger audience by Gray Barker in 1970 in his book The Mothman Prophecies, which would later be adapted into a movie in 2002 starring Richard Gere. Wasn't the best, but still worth a watch. Point Pleasant held its first annual Mothman Festival in 2002, when a 12-foot tall metallic statue of the creature was unveiled in 2003. Not too shabby. And finally, coming in at number 1, the Skunk Ape. Now, these cryptids could be lurking almost anywhere around the south, but they have a particular tendency to pop up around Florida. The Skunk Ape, also known as Swamp Cabbage Man, Swamp Ape, Stink Ape, Florida Bigfoot, Louisiana Bigfoot, Myakka Ape, Swamp Squatch, and Myakka Skunk Ape, is a humanoid creature said to inhabit Florida, as well as North Carolina and Arkansas, and is named for its appearance and for the unpleasant odor that is said to occupy it. Now, reports began back in the 60s and 70s, with one sighting in 74 describing a foul-smelling, hairy ape-like creature which ran upright on 2 legs around the suburban neighborhoods of Dade County. Skeptical investigator Joe Nickel has written in the past that some of the reports may represent sightings of the black bear, and it is likely that other sightings are mere hoaxes or misidentification of wildlife. Now, while the National Park Service has dismissed the existence of skunk apes as a myth, local residents remain adamant that their fragrant primates occasionally appear to terrorize their pets.